All right, it is 11 a.m. over here on the East Coast. So we're going to go ahead and get started, everyone. I know people are still going to file in here, but with respect to everybody's time, we have an hour, so let's make sure we utilize that to our fullest. So I'm going to go ahead and kick things off here. My name is John Jakubik, one of the account executives here at AttackMiner, and I'm going to give a brief overview of who we are, what we're about, and most importantly, why we do what we do and how we operate. Just take a few minutes of time there to explain our angle on things, and then I'm going to kick it over to Steve, who's going to take the conversation from there, who is one of the engineers over at Arctic Wolf. So Steve, if you could, that first page right here, talking about AttackMiner. That previous one real quick. Awesome. So about AttackMiner, we are headquartered right here in Charlotte, North Carolina, South Charlotte, near the South Carolina border. We're about 3 years old, had a lot of growth so far, really excited about where things are going. I know we have some clients here. We also have some prospects that are attending as well. So a little bit about us, our elevator pitch here. We are a vendor agnostic advisory firm that helps IT professionals commit and implement the right IT solutions for their needs, right? So since our inception in 19, like I just mentioned, we've completed more than 2,500 evaluations for clients, okay? And Steve, if you want to go over to this next slide here, where we can see all the solutions and the solution portfolio. So of course, I can run through all of these solutions that we have in our portfolio: contact center, cloud, public cloud, co-location, you name it. We can most certainly provide it for you, okay? But where we very much try to differentiate ourselves here at AttackMiner is that agnostic approach, right? We're not here to sell you a solution or a product that doesn't fit your specific needs. We're here to have multiple conversations with you to understand what you need and where you're trying to go when it comes to your IT environment and infrastructure. We sit on the same table or same side of the table as you to help, again, find the best solution for where you guys are trying to go. Okay, that's who we are. That's what we're about. That's why we operate in the capacity that we do. And one of our kind of leading into the webinar here, one of our fantastic partners is Arctic Wolf. Obviously, you guys know why we're all here when it comes to cybersecurity. But I'm going to pass it over to Steve, who is one of the engineers for Arctic Wolf. He is going to take reign in regards to this conversation today. We also have Ryan Pedersen here as well, one of the account executives with Arctic Wolf. We've had some fantastic success with them in the past. We've got some really cool stuff going on with them currently, and we'll most certainly continue to have a fantastic partnership moving forward. So in the way that we could collaborate today and bring this hopefully valuable webinar to the table for you guys, we're really excited to kick this thing off. And before I pass it over to Steve, just want to make you guys aware, I know we're already utilizing that chat function down there. If you have any questions pertaining to the conversation today, please feel free in real time to ask some of those questions, either about AttackMiner, Arctic Wolf, or anything in between. We'll make this as interactive as possible, and just so we can make sure we all get the most out of it at the end of the day. So with that, I'll kick it over to you, Steve, and you can take it from here, brother.
Appreciate it, John. Hi, everybody. Nice to meet you. My name's Steve Hall. I'm a pre-sales engineer at Arctic Wolf. I'm paired with Ryan. Ryan and I support the Carolinas. I also support Georgia and upstate New York, which isn't on here. But one of the things that I've been here around 2.5 years. Over the course of the 2.5 years, some of the things that I've been interested in is attack surface coverage. When we engage with our customer base, oftentimes there's not a huge understanding to some individuals who don't have built out security programs. So a little bit about me and what brought me to Arctic Wolf is mid-90s. I started my practitioner career as more infrastructure focused, route switch originally early on in my career. Early 2000s, I switched more of a focus. I didn't stop doing route switch stuff, but I switched more of a focus to security as a whole, to really understand, for the companies that I was protecting, both as individual contributors and as management, how I can shore gaps to fill the void. So one of the things that gravitated me towards Arctic Wolf as a solution was, if anyone's ever deployed a SOC or a SIM, they know how heavy-handed those types of things are. But specifically around attack surface coverage, right? There are certain areas of the attack surface that you need to monitor in order to be able to detect. So this is one of the things and the reasons why I created this talk, is really to kind of high level, what's your attack surface, and then kind of help navigate customers to make informed decisions. So this slide here ultimately is why I created this conversation. Oftentimes we get into sales cycles where we have competing products or some products that appear to be competing. So depending on the marketing spend that marketing engine kind of drives forward. But fundamentally, you get EDR, MDR, XDR, SOC as a service, SIM, managed MSSPs. A lot of these solutions don't have the same attack coverage types, right? So they're not going to be necessarily apples to apples in some situations. So really the goal of this was to kind of help weed through the noise and understand what your attack surface is as an organization, what you need to defend. If you've got some of these things deployed and are in place currently, what are your gaps? What do you need to do to deploy a solution that fills that gap for your detection? So the one good thing about this slide, I know it gets a little confusing. There's a lot of logos there. They're all generally focused around monitoring. And I guess I've got a blog post here that I'll share with you in chat, but this blog post is done by Bruce Schneider, if you've heard of him. He's a technologist in the space. He's pretty renowned. He's written a number of books around cryptology and he's got a blog post specifically around monitor first strategy. And I'll paraphrase what he says in that blog post, but fundamentally he asserts that you should monitor first. If you aren't monitoring at all, you're relying on prevention tools and their ability and analytics to be able to detect and stop. Where he comes into play and gives some feedback is really that if you aren't monitoring, you're effectively guessing at the efficacy of the tools and your overall progress for your security program. So if you're monitoring, if you're not monitoring, there's gaps, you're effectively guessing at the efficacy of it. And he puts it in way more elegant terms, but I'll share that in the chat with you to read. It's a great read. He really makes a compelling case for a monitor first strategy. Now, I'm from a monitoring company, so bias noted, but as a practitioner, I always try to do that as well. And that's why SIM is so hard to do, is you can deploy it, you need people to manage it, create analytics around it. And some of those things we'll talk about as I go through here. Now, with that said, you need to know when you're talking to these vendors what your attack surface is, because you need to understand what they cover. So fundamentally, this may seem very basic when it comes to attack surface, but really, what is your attack surface? The attack surface really, if you don't know what an attack surface means, it's really an entry point for that adversary to get a foothold or a claw hold into your environment and then to propagate throughout your environment with the intent to do whatever they're trying to do, right? Exfiltrate data, create encryption strings to encrypt your stuff, to get domain admin ultimately, or whatever the adversary is. But all of those components there, network, identity, endpoint, cloud, those are all components and entry points for an adversary to get a hold of. So if you aren't addressing some of those needs, whether it's mitigations or detection sources, that can be a gap in your detection. So understand what you do there. But how do you identify an attack surface? Well, if you have a program built out, fundamentally, one of the first things, that's a whole nother talk all of in itself, is developing a security program. But when you develop a security program, what you'll do is build a risk register. You're going to get your assets, your things that you need to monitor and protect as an organization. You'll tie numbers to them, financials, so that it becomes easy to articulate when you want to buy or get additional tool sets or bolster your security, that you have values tied to that. Now, that's when you have a very mature program. If you have an immature program or are just starting out, just know your business, know where your attacks are going to come from. Are your users remote? Are they hybrid? Are they back into the office? Are they using cloud? Are they checking Exchange? So really knowing your business, knowing what your organization produces as intellectual property or what you're trying to protect is really fundamentally as easy as it could be. So really understanding what you do, but then also translating that to the vendors that you communicate on a regular basis. What are they protecting and what are they filling? What gaps are they filling for you? So know that. I think really what it does is set your charter for how you go forward in protecting your environment from a monitoring kind of strategy. So know your attack surface. But knowing your attack surface can be challenging. It's what I've noticed over the course of a couple of years is that prospects, varying degrees, will get an immature program handed to them. They might be more infrastructure focused. They might be more mature. There's a lot of different trajectories for a lot of different organizations. So this is not a one size fits all, but fundamentally understand what you're trying to protect for your organization. That's going to put you in a good position when you have these conversations with us or other vendors, what their coverage looks like. Now, attack, I'm kind of an attack matrix geek a little bit. I like anatomy of attack. I like to understand how attacks work and how adversaries use certain techniques. And then ultimately, how do you detect those things? So the attack matrix is a wonderful framework that can give you a lot of information about tactics, techniques, what adversary groups are doing. And I'll show you some examples of what those look like. It's not the only framework leverage. I'll show you an example of kill chain later on, Lockheed Martin's kill chain. But this really, the title of it, of the talk and the attack kind of fit. So I figured we'd take a little bit deep dive into the matrix here. Now, what it does is quantify behaviors and techniques. So if you aren't familiar with the attack matrix, this is a way to understand what those adversary behaviors look like and quantify them into sequences or attack structures. It's meant to overall improve security posture. So there's a lot of information, and I'll show you some of the tools that, specifically the Navigator tool, that you can use to get good information in order to make informed decisions. Now there's a number of them. I'm going to focus on enterprise today, but ICS is there. So for the controls teams that want to focus on their environments, mobile teams, there's attack matrix out there for those as well. What a framework like attack provides is a common language to communicate. You'll notice that a lot of the vendors that you might have deployed in your solution or in your systems at your organization reference TTPs or tactic IDs as it relates to the MITRE attack framework. And MITRE just came out with a attack matrix focused on a few APT groups, specifically where a lot of endpoint providers, kind of played in that game. So that, an evaluation of sorts. Not of sorts, an evaluation, but it provides that consistent level of kind of communication across the board. So those TTPs get kind of rolled up into the alerts that you see oftentimes in those tool sets. Now, the nice thing about this too is this framework is constantly being updated. Literally, version 11 came out yesterday. I had to update all the slides that had screenshots of version 10 to version 11. So this is continually being enhanced as new threat analytics come out. So wonderful, wonderful resource. Now, how a lot of organizations leverage attack are things like threat-informed defense. I've got an example of that. But if you're a financial institution and these various APT groups focus and target financial institutions, this would be a good way to say, okay, these are the groups. Here's a combined heat map of what they do, and then overlay it with your SOC assessments so that you create analytics and detection rules based on those adversaries. That's threat-informed defense. Adversary emulation is kind of a cool one. It's one of the things I like because I like to still do some red teaming stuff, but this adversary emulation is really taking a hands-on approach to making sure that you have detections in place. So going through the actual sequence, almost like red teaming, but going through a sequence of what the emulated adversary would do in your environment. So to see in the event to see that you have detections or can detect it in place. So a little more hands-on approach there. There's a nice GitHub repo that gives you guided walkthroughs on some of these adversaries, but a good one there. SOC assessments, SOCs are continually improving. And they do these in a lot of ways as it relates to attack matrix. SOC assessments can be done to get very granular on their analytics around tactics, techniques, sub-techniques, and what they're detecting in their environment, and then overlaying it with things like that threat-informed defense. So pretty valuable there. Threat intelligence, there's a lot of threat intelligence that comes out of MITRE. People contribute to this. It's a great method to kind of get insight into various attack structures. The quantitative scoring, when you deploy your security program, with some of the things that are challenges you may have are metrics that you measure over time. So there's some ways to use these as quantitative scoring. It's more of what I'm going to take you through on attack surface coverage is probably in line with that instead of the deep dives around some of this. MITRE Ingenuity is a great resource. They have training tracks on all these, as well as a new one that focuses around threat hunting. So if you're interested in that kind of thing, that kind of detail, it's a good subscription to subscribe to if you've got a means to do so. But all of these things ultimately roll up to make an informed decision. Now, The commercial segment that Ryan and I work with, I would say a large majority of them don't have the maturity level to be able to pull this off as a process, continuous involvement. So there are resources. There's a lot of things that go into doing this as an organization. That's why alternatives like Arctic Wolf really make a lot of sense for organizations to cover the basis in a lot of these detection sequences. So MITRE's great resource. If you're a geek like me and like to understand some of those nuances of attack, this is a great resource to go to. But we understand that the customers that we help facilitate change and improve security postures in don't often have, where they're wearing multiple hats, they don't often have a lot of time to devote to things like this. So just something to note there. This is MITRE. So I'm going to pop out of the presentation here and show you on the browser a little bit better look instead of screenshots, but you can see there's tactics along the top, there's techniques that go north-south, and then there's sub-techniques under other techniques. And I'll take you through a few of them, but you get detail about techniques. You can get specifics about that technique around the ID and information about it. You can get more procedural examples where you have adversaries actually executing those tactics. And I'll show you in the heat map what that looks like. Mitigations, and a lot of what I'm going to show you in Navigator are focused on mitigations. And the reason I focus them on mitigations is because oftentimes as a consumer, you're buying a solution to mitigate a problem. So that's kind of why I did that. I'll also show you why detection sources at the bottom here are so valuable to get to. The end result is you want to be able to ingest telemetry from a lot of different log source types in order to have the ability to create analytics that tie to those detection of those techniques. And you'll notice there's a detection section in each one of these tactics. So that's compelling to say you need to be detecting these things. You need to be monitoring your environment, because if you aren't, you have a potential of missing some of these solutions. And then details under detections on what you would be looking for in specific, and then references around it. So I'll give you a better look when I go to pop out to my browser. But using MITRE attack tools, there's a number of different tools. I'm sure I forgot some on this slide, but Attack Navigator is one I'm going to focus on here. The Center for Threat Informed Defense has a number of details around things like adversary emulation, which is the one that really, if you like hands-on stuff, that's a really cool one to look into. But the Attack Matrix itself is a resource in of itself. So I'm going to pop out into my browser here, and I'll take you through the Navigator real quick. Ryan, give me a thumbs up if you can see my screen. Okay. So this is MITRE Attack, mitre.org, attack.mitre.org. You can see again a little bit better detail around the tactics, techniques at the top, the tactics at the top, the techniques underlying it. So you can see that phishing one. If you pop in here, you can see the details around spear phishing with attachments. You can see, let me move my window. You can see the techniques, the sub techniques, the detail around it. Also, these are all the APT groups that use phishing with attachments focused. Now that's not surprising, right? It's a pretty common technique, but you can see and get some intelligence around those adversarial groups that you can create with ultimately in mind to keep mitigations and detection sources in process. So things like mitigation techniques around user training, which we have an awareness package, software configuration. So things like using SPF or DKIM. So a lot of what our concierge security team that gets aligned to our customers, they work with them to align things like best practice. And as it relates to email, specifically using things like DKIM and SPF can help mitigate things like anti-spoofing. So really valuable insights into not only mitigations, how you can mitigate these things, but also, again, detection sources. Are you doing network monitoring? Are you grabbing flows, file creation, a number of different sources to give you insights? And then all these references, look at all these contributors here. So organizations, independent resources contributing to the analytics of these sources. So very widely used tool. Another one that I think is cool that I find fascinating is the BITS job in Windows environments. BITS is a service that runs that in the background that helps do updates and various things. You can access BITS information around PowerShell or BITS admin tool. PowerShell is one of those things where a lot of adversaries, and I'll take you through there's an investigation at the end here that I'll take you through that there's some PowerShell activity in here. And how you do that is process monitoring, process telemetry. So but giving you insight also into how adversaries would use this against you. So again, the details around it, the APT groups that use it, mitigations around various things, monitoring your network, monitoring your registries, user management, specifically around users and groups, detection sources, process creation, again, process monitoring to be able to monitor these types of things. So understanding what your mitigations are doing is paramount, right? And if you have a gap there, then understand how you fill that gap. As part of our solution, we have an integration with Sysmon. So for Windows environments, that Sysmon integration provides process monitoring at the endpoint. So things like process creation. So very critical when it comes to that. So that's attack. Now, a couple ways to get to Navigator. One, you can simply Google MITRE Attack Navigator. It'll go right to their GitHub repo to launch their tool. If you're doing and looking through adversary groups, you can grab the groups, go into the group, and you can see attack navigation layers here, and you can pop in and view it. So it'll pull up a new Navigator window that automatically highlights that APT group techniques and sub techniques that they leverage. So there's a couple different ways to get to it. I'll let me just close this one here, and I'll go to a brand new one here. And this is what you'd get if you just navigate to it. There's a lot of different ways to operate here. Creating a new layer is typically where you start. Creating a new layer, saying whether you're enterprise, mobile, or ICS, and then picking the version and or domain that you want to address. So if you just do enterprise, it's going to automatically create the standard enterprise matrix here. So from just a quick glance at the tool itself, this search window allows you to search for specifics, keywords, descriptions, attack IDs, go through techniques. You can see as you navigate through here, it highlights various things. Threat groups, this is one of the things that I'll show you in an adversary emulation, but you can select these groups, you can color code them, you can create effectively heat maps and scoring systems that give you good information on how to better fill gaps that you may have or identify gaps that you have in order to shore those up. Now, malicious software that adversaries use to mitigations, which is fundamentally what I'm focusing on when I create these heat maps, you'll see. There are some nuance when it comes to these things. Obviously, protection tools vary in efficacy. So, but it's good enough from a mitigation, from a visual perspective, I should say, that it's going to give you a good idea of what that coverage looks like. Data source is ultimately what you want to get down to. So if we go up here and we search for process, to look at process monitoring. And as we go through here and look at these sources, process creation, look at how much that fills up. Now, that doesn't mean you have analytics that correspond to all these detections, but it does give you the ability to detect them when new and emerging threats come out. So as new IOCs come out, if your SOC is doing analytics to identify analytics around these techniques, it puts you in the best position to quickly respond to those things. So the reason I didn't choose data source as a means to show the heat maps is because when you look at this, it can give a false sense of security. If you think, if you're monitoring process creation, we do all these things. That's not necessarily true. You need analytics that tie around there, whether they're static observations to behavior observations, a number of different analytics that help round out the story of those detections. But having that log source from an ingestion perspective really puts you in the best position. So I didn't want to give a false sense of security that if you're doing process monitoring, all of this is covered. I wanted to focus it around what I normally see when we talk to customers is that customers have mitigations in place, but don't necessarily have a strategy as an oversight for monitoring those solutions. So that's a quick cursor. You have a lot of ability to collapse and take another views. I'll show you some of the views in here. You have a ability to kind of export data to Excel, export it via JSON, same with as a PIC or a JPEG file here as well. So in the effort of saving time, I've pre-done some of these things as an example. And these first 4 tabs are really focused around that threat-informed defense kind of concept, where you have, let's say all these APT groups, Fin7, APT 29, Sandworm, let's say they were all financially focused. We know these last 2 are more Russian-based, but if we take a look at Fin7, APT 29, Sandworm, let's say that they're all financially motivated organizations. So we take a look at the heat map, we create a heat map, we select them, we give them a scoring. So you can see we can provide scoring to each one of these. And then as we look at all of these individually and then combine them, it creates an overall heat map for organizations to kind of dig into and say, okay, anything with green, you can see there's 3 detections. Anything in red is a single detection. So as you export this data out for your detection methodology, it gives you a prioritization technique on what you should cover first, what you could cover second, so on and so forth. So it gives you a good way to set, kind of an approach or a cadence on what you want to address first, second, and third. Now, a lot of SOCs will take those threat-informed defense layers, layer them on top of a SOC assessment, and then understand where their gaps are when it comes to that, where they're detecting, where they're missing gaps, and what analytics they need to write. Well, ultimately, that all kind of rose up in a cohesive process. Now, that's pretty heavy-handed. Like I said, most of our customers that Ryan and I work with aren't afforded the time to be able to do that. They're often wearing multiple hats. So when you evaluate the vendors to do this stuff for you, to monitor your environments, this really puts you in a really good position, which ultimately gets to what the whole talk stems from today. So these next portions of Navigator are focused on mitigations and specific things that I see. I see around what people have in their environment. So you can see this one's focused around endpoint, AV, EDR type of technology. And as you can span it, there's a lot of coverage here, right? There's some good coverage from those tool sets. But as you dig through here, it's not comprehensive, right? When you go back to the other side of the attack matrix here for various tactics, you can see that a lot of the command and control is just missing. This is generally done around network monitoring. So if you don't have network monitoring portion in place, you can have gaps here around command and control. And a lot of the command and control communication, which I'll show you in the investigation, it rolls up there too. But a lot of the command and control in like ransomware events nowadays focus around communicating to a known bad adversary outside of the organization to do things like key exchange or exfiltrate data or whatever. So know that if you are focused on EDR, that's good, but understand where your gaps are when it comes to a lot of these different techniques. When you look at network now, you can see that now it's filling in, a lot of the command and control things, some data exfiltration as well. But it's missing some of the endpoint stuff, right? It's missing some of those things that endpoint had. So again, understand your gaps, understand what the solutions that you have in place provide. Identity often is an overlooked one. I'm surprised by that too, because it's such a critical, when you think about how bad actors get in, they're stealing credentials, which is part of our vulnerability scans. We do account takeover scanning, but part of that thing is they're grabbing identity to log into your infrastructure and get a foothold. If you aren't looking at identity from that perspective, oftentimes even when they trick an adversary to get in, they're using identity to move throughout the environment. So this is often overlooked as a monitoring source or a correlation across all of your disparate log sources. This is really an under kind of utilized solution from my experience. Now you can see though, there's a lot of value in identity monitoring and having mitigations in place for identity. So very, very important, but don't forget cloud. I mean, cloud, a lot of organizations, they'll think, if I move to the cloud, the onus goes on that provider. That's not true. Depending on the solution that you're looking to get, whether it's infrastructure, whether it's SaaS, you still have some culpability when it comes to managing and maintaining the security of that environment. So again, a good visual to say that it's not full coverage, right? But it's combination. It's starting to know what your attack surface looks like so you can fill the gaps in. Now, when you look at it combined, now that's all of the layers combined into one. Now you look at this heat map and your coverage now becomes pretty compelling. Not saying that even all of those detection sources are covering all of these. It's really the opportunity, right? Understanding where you do business, how to protect those things, and making sure that if you do have gaps, you know where they are. So I think this is really compelling. That's why I kind of wanted to share this, is that it's important for our customers to understand that identity, DNS. There are some other log sources that I haven't even talked about that add up to very interesting and critical log source types. And that's the goal for us here at Arctic Wolf anyway, is to be holistic in nature, to pull all those sources of telemetry, to understand when those mitigation tools deployed are missing things. So, and I'll pop back here to the presentation. And so here's some of the screenshots that just go into what we already kind of went through. They're just not as easy to read in a screenshot format. So that first one, EDR network, this one, identity, again, cloud. And then when you look at it holistically, it's a little bit more compelling story on what you have the potential to detect. And really just to kind of round out that part of the conversation is that this comes from observations that lead to ticketed incidents. One of the things that we try to do here at Arctic Wolf is reduce the false positive nature of an observation that we bring to our customers. So really that there's value in the fact that we're engaging you, but also that knowing that we've reduced that from a false positive state to a ticketed incident, which is ultimately that true positive scenario. But you can see here from the breadth of what we're ingesting, there's a number of different things. Endpoint isn't just the focus. Firewall isn't just the focus. So it's important to be holistic in your approach and what you're monitoring. So that kind of rounds out the attack sequence. I'm going to switch to an investigation. This investigation was provided by Mark Maglemont he's our VP of our S2 organization. So he manages the full SOC on the back end. He sanitized this for sharing, and this is really kind of a cool approach or a look at what an investigation might look like. Now, this specific indicator is around a certificate. Now, certificate exchange is done via network-based monitoring. So in this instance, he's got Meterpreter here. For those of you who don't know what Meterpreter is a portion of Metasploit. Metasploit is an open source framework, exploitation framework that red teamers use, pen testers use, bad actors use for purposes of exploitation. Now, Meterpreter is effectively a payload with inside Meterpreter that can weaponize things like PDFs and some other documents. And you'll see that here. In this case, it's a JavaScript file, but we can weaponize that in order to do certain things. In this specific instance, a reverse shell, an encrypted reverse shell, basically an adversary impacts a document of some kind. He gets the end user to click on a document. It creates a session back to a command and control server. And now that session's encrypted. Now they can elevate privileges. They can move laterally. They can enumerate the environment, do all the things that they need to do within that environment. But it creates a shell that really effectively out from the inside out creates a connection that bypasses those controls. So it's from this standpoint, there's opportunity to detect these things, even if you aren't doing SSL decryption, right? So on the onset of a three-way handshake or that setup of that communication, there's an opportunity to look at the X509 certificates in whether they're malicious in nature or not. This instance, they're suspicious. You can obfuscate things like SSL certs if you get your own cert. There's opportunities in ways to make it look like other certs. So there's ways that you can do this, but there's still value when it comes to some of these even static indicators that kind of flag behaviors like that certificate exchange of the initial setup as an observation. So if you didn't have process monitoring, which some of the things I'll be talking about after this, deployed in your environment, this could be one of those breadcrumbs that you start an investigation and work your way back from. So, but also one of the things that we try to do for our customers as well is understand where they do business. So does reputation of the IP make sense? Does the geolocation of that activity make sense for the normal communication for that customer environment? So we're trying to be holistic and trying to bring some of these things to the table, but in this case, does it make sense? So as this is the kill chain example. This is where we are from a kill chain perspective in the command and control section. And that's generally done based around network telemetry. Now, the second bullet was interesting. I was wondering what to, if I was to keep that in, saying if this is hostile CNC, we want to know what the bad actor's doing. And I'm like, well, is most CNC hostile in nature? And I thought about it. No, not necessarily. Pen testers. This could be us catching a pen tester in one of their engagements. So they're not necessarily a bad actor, but they're trying to test the defenses for your organization. So I left it in there. Obviously, he's a smarter guy than I am. So, but this indicator right here goes into, this happened before the detection around that suspicious cert that got exchanged. This one, couple things about this one. PowerShell, any administrators out there can recognize this PowerShell. There's a couple things about this PowerShell that's interesting in my opinion. One, it's encoded. Most administrators don't encode what they do for normal activity. Even the tools and things that Microsoft uses under the sheets don't necessarily always encode what they're trying to do. So this is suspicious in my opinion right away since it's encoded, but it's also trying to stuff encoded code into a scheduled creation of a scheduled task. So this right now here is suspect, right? There's something going on here. We need to take a deeper look. So as you unpack the code there, there's a couple things that fall out of this. One is that this is for sure now, I mean, this is malicious in nature, that the encoding and what this is trying to do really equals to bad actor in the environment. So a couple things this script identifies, it's looking for a reference. So you can see at the top here, it's looking for certain registry keys that already exist. So this likely isn't the first stage of the attack in the first place. So it's referencing a registry hive that a metric in the registry hive that it needs to pull out and do. But this script is really establishing persistence. So it's creating that level of persistence so that if that adversary loses its connection, there's a means to get back in. So with confidence, this is a reverse shell that's connecting back via that interpreter session. Now, as we engage and as we dig into the process monitoring, because that sysmon, again, allows you to do process monitoring at the endpoint. But as we dig in from an investigation perspective, we see the command line argument here. That's another value of sysmon, is that you're capturing command line arguments that happen on the endpoint. So in this specific case, you see the draft of that sponsorship agreement try to open, but it's all stemmed from that Explorer. So that, when the end result here is the user who downloaded this, wanted this to download this draft of sponsorship from a known trusted site. They said it didn't work right when they tried to open it. Well, it didn't work right for them, but it worked right for the adversary. So this is what initiated the scripts, the several stages as part of that, persistence, and then ultimately connecting back to that known C2 server, that Metasploit instance. So knowing that the parent process was Windows Explorer, it spun up that weaponized JScript file. And then here's just reviewing that kill chain, right? So it doesn't appear that it was a targeted incident. It's more generalized in nature. It could have potentially been targeted. We don't know the intent there, but the adversary downloaded that file, the weaponized JScript file. The delivery was from the download from that trusted site. The exploitation was that attacker or the end user clicking on a link from their Explorer window to try to open it. The installation came as several of those stages of creating that scheduled task, creating the persistence and control back, the communication back to that command and control server. And then observations, really after that adversary got that reverse shell connected, they were using Bloodhound to enumerate the environment. So very common technique. And if you don't know what Bloodhound is, it's a tool that gives you the shortest path by enumerating your groups, users, things in the environment to fastest way to get to domain admin. So generally not an administrative tool that your admins are using in your environment. Generally, they'll typically have an account that they can elevate their privileges to run domain and privileges as. But it gives you a good understanding of what attack sequences look like and where some of the gaps would be if you aren't doing some of these things. So at this point in time, we're working with the customer to do that remediation, make sure that we back out everything that adversary changes as part of that attack sequence. But this gives you a good idea of what the Lockheed kill chain kind of quantifies this attack sequence as. So that's a typical investigation. And I think that's really what I had for you today. I think in summary, the things that I wanted to kind of make, kind of get clear is really understand what you're trying to protect. And if you have gaps, understand how to close them. So, and then ultimately evaluate monitoring. I think, you can put mitigations in place, but I promise you that if a protection tool knows how to act on something, they're going to act on it. From time to time, you have these adversarial groups who are incentivized to bypass these security controls. So really the way you do that is monitor and have oversight of what's happening in your environment. But when you evaluate customers like this, understand what when you evaluate vendors, I should say, like Arctic Wolf, understand what they bring to the table. Make sure that they're maximizing your detection capabilities and that they're covering your attack surface. And then, MITRE, obviously, depending on the maturity level of your environment, whether you have resources to do this, it's a great resource. There's a lot of value that comes out of this. And if you don't have the bandwidth, here's my sales head. We're willing to talk to you. We can talk to you, tell you how we can help you in your environment be more secure. That's what I have. John?
Awesome. Thanks, Steve. Fantastic stuff there. A lot of value when it comes to that conversation. And just to kind of wrap everything up here, to all the participants, again, thank you guys for coming. We did record this conversation as well, so if you would like a recording of that, I'm not sure if we're going to send that out or if you have to request that, but we can most assuredly get that to you, this recording. A lot of information in here, so you can go back and check that out and make sure you got everything you wanted to get out of this conversation. Now, in kind of follow-up to this conversation here, next step, let's meet. Let's meet. If you think Arctic Wolf can come to the table and help you in any way, shape, or form with your cybersecurity posture, let's set up a meeting, right? And I don't know how many people out there were enticed to this webinar by that $150 gift card opportunity, but summer is right around the corner. It's going to start getting a lot sunnier out there. And if you guys are interested in that gift card, to set that meeting up and to get that gift card, we're going to have to set up a meeting with Arctic Wolf on the back end of this webinar. And to do so, you see Bryce's email right here, bryce.olry@opcala.com, one of our managing partners. Send him that email. We will get you in touch with Arctic Wolf. We'll broker that conversation, and we'll get everybody on the horn to learn more about how they can help support your organization. Okay. And with that, again, we want to thank Ryan for being on. We want to thank Steve and the Arctic Wolf team for putting this on. A lot of value, a lot of great stuff came out of this. And if you have any questions for us, just in general, feel free to obviously contact them, contact us at Opcala, to Bryce's email as well with any general questions moving forward. And we look forward to meeting with you guys. We look forward to doing business with you in the future. And any way we can help, of course, let us know. But with that, we are all wrapped up. Thank you guys for coming, and we'll see you in the future. Appreciate you. Thanks, Steve.